Welcome to Queued Up with Ziz and Pam, where we talk about powerful questions and what it means to be educated in the 21st century. So this particular episode is going to be a doozy. We're going to talk about grace in the learning process, especially during this time.
Yeah.
How are you feeling, Pam?
I'm feeling good, except I'm feeling so much compassion for students, for teachers, and for parents, particularly right now. The stress level, I follow social media a little bit, not a lot, but when I do, I'm hearing teachers that are trying so hard to manage their own lives at the same time. They're trying to keep their students, engaged, which of course is not happening, and everybody's exhausted that is focusing on that. And then the New York Times actually had an article about how some parents are like, forget it, I'm just not doing this, and allowing their kids to kind of explore their own interests and follow some other pathways. So what are you thinking?
The same thing. And I mean, it's what I don't remember the number of weeks that we've been on this online platform, so to speak. And I think what we're finding, especially if we bring in Daniel Pink's concept of belonging, the online process, it doesn't quite capture what the students need or what the teachers need. So say a student is like, I don't really understand what you're telling me. I don't quite get it. So the teacher's not able to just go stand right beside the student and take them through the process. And depending on what's going on in the parent's home, the parent may not be able to do it either, because they're like, okay, look, I need my laptop back because we only have 2 laptops and I have 3 children, and you don't have enough devices, enough Wi-Fi connectivity. I mean, there's so many things that are happening. And is this really what we should be doing?
Well, and that goes right to the point of the 7-20-10 rule, which is this learning and development model that they surveyed a bunch of executives and said, how do you learn? And they found that only 10% of learning comes from content academic learning. And this goes in line with the Navy that switched to 20% classroom, 80% experiential. So the 70-20-10 is 10% academic content, very minor, 20% social interaction, learning through social interaction, and 70% is actual doing it, experience it. So it kind of makes you step back and say, sitting our kids in front of a computer screen for hours a day, absorbing content, in my opinion, it's not learning. It's not engaging. And if you don't have engagement and you don't have interest and you don't have that belonging, you're talking about that safety, either physically or emotionally, and you don't have relationship, that human kind of connection, you don't have learning. So we're quote distance learning thing is throwing content at them that's a memorization thing that's doing the same thing that standardized testing was doing.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a really good point. I mean, it's like 10% is a really small number. And essentially that means that they're going to forget it pretty quick. And I think I heard Dr. I, who promotes her Classroom Without Walls, was talking about, if you really want to test whether or not your child is learning, ask them a question related to what it is that they're learning. And ask a question related to something that they were studying a month ago, and just listen and see what they say.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's this, formal learning. I think it's interesting, and like going back to the subject of grace. I mean, think about parents, and once they start to figure this out, they're like, okay, hold on a second. How can I help my child? Or support my child.
Yes, and I think the whole thing of this sort of panic that my child is getting behind, and when we really evaluate it, we're saying, are they fitting into this education machine based on the date they were born is really the criteria. And this culture of sameness of, are they the same as all the other kids? Are they measured against this external guideline that they're supposed to follow, which is not humanly possible for everyone to follow because every human being is unique and different. So giving grace to the fact that we need this time where we need the emotional safety, we need to respect. I think teachers take the brunt of all of this because parents are like, you handle it. Schools like, you handle it. So they know that for their students to be culturally accepted, they have to meet these benchmarks, even though so many teachers, I would say the majority of teachers that I know, that I listen to, they know this. And it's really hard because how do they play the game of school while at the same time trying to honor their understanding and their passion for connecting and engaging with students? And we're not investing in their new type of learning that they need to be the co-learner coach rather than what Dr. I called the other day, sage on the stage.
Yeah.
You know, that type of learning is gone. We don't just hand out data and say, here, you absorb it, and then it's applied data that's needed, not absorbing of it.
Well, since you mentioned the concept that Dr. I brought up about the sage on the stage, as it relates to parents, and I think we both in a few episodes ago, we mentioned how one of our children kind of said, okay, mom, dad, like back up, we got this, which means that we are not the dictator, so to speak, as a parent. It's like facilitate. And I think that's hard. I know it was hard for me. And it's a learning process. So this process of learning, not just giving your child grace, but then also giving yourself grace, because every child is different, like you said. And when you figure out that child's need, you're like, okay, got that. And then it changes.
It does. And it's so much easier when you become the learner instead of the teacher.
Yes.
And it's less exhausting. And when you begin saying, instead of how does my child fit into the system, how do I enable my child to be mentally and physically and emotionally well operating in this system? And that part starts at home, you know, and it starts with challenging the system. I regularly went into my girls when they decided to go to traditional schooling. You know, I put them in alternative schooling for most of elementary and middle school. And then they could pick a high school, any high school within 15 minutes, because whatever they chose, because that was my options. But I think when they did choose it, they chose a very elite private school that was intense. I mean, I totally get why kids in high achieving areas, high achieving schools are at risk now, as high or higher mental illness than kids in poverty, immigrants, foster kids, because they are trapped in this, system, and we've been feeding it. So I think giving grace to step back and say, okay, what's going on here?
The point that you brought up about putting yourself in as a learner. So let's just use social media. I know and I don't remember when Twitter came out, but I was working at an institution of higher learning, and I had an intern, and I'd be like, okay, this Twitter thing, can you help teach me this Twitter thing? and of course, I just got rid of my Fliposaurus. That's what I used to call it, because I had like one of the old flip phones, and I was like, I'm not switching over, So when I finally did, I get an iPhone, and I'm like, oh my goodness, wow, this is amazing. I'm so connected. But one of the things I was thinking to myself, why I didn't switch over sooner, is because I didn't want to always be connected to my job, 24/7. But anyway, going back to the Twitter example, they would show me so quickly that I couldn't pick up on it. And then I'm like, okay, hold on. What did you just do? Can you do that again? And they would, and I'm like, whoa. But you know what I learned from that was the problem. And of course, they had a tough time teaching me. So that was part of it. But the other part of the problem was opening myself up to just playing and being wrong or not getting it right several, 10, 20, 30 times until I got used to it. So it was just, I started to realize as I did more research on Steve Jobs and the devices that they created, they wanted you to play with it so that you could figure out things. That's why they didn't send you instruction manuals.
Yeah.
in and of itself is like what we're talking about is like they'll
Yeah.
explore on their own.
Well, did you see that example of in Africa where they put a laptop in the middle of nowhere and the kids figured out how to use it? My
I did.
7-year-old, when she was 7, of course now she's 19, but when I first got my cell phone, I didn't know how to use it. She goes, "Here, Mom," and she took it and figured stuff out that I was amazed. I mean, but it is that exploration, that doing that, you know, really changed how they learned, and that experiential component that we talk about.
Right. And
Mhm.
play is a big part of it. And I
Mhm.
think we adults forget about that.
Mhm.
So that, like you said, that's 70%. So I could use examples in sports all the time. Like we're in the classroom, you go over a play and we talk about the playbook because you have the entire playbook, but you change it to fit your opponent that you're facing each week. And when you go out and practice, you go over those particular plays based on what you think the defense is going to do. So, long story short, it was all about practice, going over it repetitively. And so what happened? What happened? Like how did we lose track of the experiential part?
Well, because we made school, academic learning in a classroom, the center of how learning happened. And we did that with the 2001 testing of standardized No Child Left Behind. And then we exacerbated it with the Race to the Top, which made it even more. And so we doubled down on classroom learning as the only form of education that a child could have. And that has set us so far behind in this new economy. It's crazy.
So Pam, really quick, who were we racing against?
That's a funny thing because we've made ourselves through ranking competing against each other and other schools and not against ourselves, which is really truly the only people we can compete against, even in athletics.
Yeah, yeah. So it's interesting. It's fascinating, especially when you look at what is it? It's Norway. That's the is it Norway or Sweden? Sometimes I forget which. Uh, is typically in the world rankings way up
Finland,
there.
Finland.
Finland, right? Thank you,
Yes,
Finland. But
yes.
then play is a big part of what they do.
Oh, they don't even start school till they're 7 or 8. The teachers are respected. They can teach however
Yeah,
they want to teach.
yeah.
There's no homework. They don't standardize tests. And people say, well, Finland is a country that is more, uniform than we are. So therefore we can't have the same thing. But that's not true because the principles of honoring play, the principles of honoring students and having the community come together to enable them to flourish, the or the de-emphasizing of standardized testing that they have to fit in rather than look at who they are, and having the teacher develop relationships with their students, multi-year relationships even, that they can nurture and encourage them as a coach, not as here's all the information you need to know for a test. And teachers hate this too. Teachers
Yeah.
do not want to teach to the test. I will say that really I keep hearing parents saying, oh, those teachers, and teachers saying, oh, those parents. Well, guess what? We have to co-own this. We both have to co-own, and we're both feeding this system and this machine that is not enhancing the well-being of our children or allowing them to flourish and develop into the best version of themselves and respond to what's happening in the market today.
Which is really the big question when it comes to parents, because they want their children to do well, when they get beyond the high school and or college. So it's really interesting because colleges are facing the same situation, and we have employers that are also saying similar things. So I think you hear the employers talk about soft skills, you know, intelligence quotients versus the emotional quotient. Um, I think as we've been diving into this particular subject and coming up with many questions and many different dialogues, and you just start to think back and you're like, wow, is it just us thinking like this?
No.
And why aren't more people saying things? And obviously people are, but I think they also feel stuck. So
It's grace. We're talking about giving grace to everyone. I think before now, this particularly this generation of parents, right, which historians will not be kind to us at all. I mean, oh my gosh, it's going to be a sad thing to look back at history at this time when we tried to mold and shape and take the freedom of choice away and the essence of being human and giving them agency and teaching them responsibility to navigate all those things. But I think to give grace, we thought we had the answer as a generation. We thought, okay, now I know what to do. Now I know if they get a corporate white collar job, they make more money. And again, we're not even questioning the fallacy that making money makes you happy, fulfilled, whatever. Again, Viktor Frankl and the work I do with Meaning and the Viktor Frankl Institute of America is, oh my gosh, you can't do that. If you pursue a external goal, it leaves a void, this emptiness that gets filled with aggression, depression, addiction, all these things that we're seeing now because we've devalued their individual right to go out and try and find who they are, how they fit in the world, and how they can contribute, which may or may not be financial. And what I love the best is that this new generation is deciding, hey, no, like there was a say like 86% were like, I'm willing to trade off a higher salary so I get some life back. I'm not willing to work 80 hours. So I think it's grace because we thought we were helping. I think it's grace because we all did, and now we know. And so what do you do now? We know. So I see it everywhere. You do too. There was just a new way forward, which was
right.
a symposium yesterday that we both participated in or listened to, and they were saying, about this whole thing. So there are plenty of opportunities now to find alternative schooling, to look at different ways to empower our children. And that wasn't available 14 years ago when I was looking for my kids. Today as I said, when I looked, there was 3 options in my community. Now there's over 33 different options and many more. That was just the charter school.
Yeah, I think like Maya Green, who led off the summit yesterday, said it very well with her thesis project. And this is a young lady that's going off to Stanford. And not only did she talk about the inequity of what happens with this type of learning and what's happening during this pandemic, because she has a younger sister and she has a parent that needs the device as well. So is trying to figure out like how to share the devices. But then she also talked about her thesis project that she got so excited about. And because she was excited about it, it led her to discovering other things that she hadn't anticipated.
Mattered. Yes, it
Yeah,
mattered to her. She pursued
exactly.
what mattered to her, and that's exactly it. And that is really education. Education is often self-taught. I mean, if you look at the great
Yes.
minds of people who changed the world, they were self-directed in their learning. They went down their rabbit holes, and that's what they cared about. Which again goes to our value of 4.0 and valedictorians. To get there, you have to be a generalist and not spend the time going down the rabbit holes of interest, right? Because you're having to conform to be able to do well in all things to get that GPA and that status. And yet it doesn't lead you to this fulfilling pathway of discovering who you are and what you're interested in that really is ultimately health and well-being to a human being.
Yeah, I mean, what you just said reminded me of a conversation I had with a teacher just last week. She was talking about her daughter, who is a junior and graduated with a 4.25 GPA, goes off to college, and her college experience so far is not so good. I mean, it's definitely not transformative. Definitely some anxiety, and mom is concerned, and obviously her daughter's concerned. And she hasn't really found that thing for her that's really driving her. So yeah, grace is a great subject.
It is. I mean, and just to give grace that we didn't know, but now we know.
Right.
So now we know, so we can give each other grace that this was something as a society, that our cultural values were external to measurement that dehumanized the child and the worthiness of the child. And I think Maya yesterday actually had that as well, that I thought was super interesting, where she was talking about these external assessments
Yes.
that really made her feel unworthy and made everyone she knew feel unworthy. And that, wow.
Well, I got one for you. And this is this is for you sports fans out there. And even if you're not a sports fan, you know, they have a test called the Wonderlic test. It's supposed to measure how intelligent you are. Well, it's not necessarily measuring your football intelligence, which is really what the game's all about. But even let's take it a step further. This guy by the name of Tom Brady, who arguably is one of the most successful quarterbacks in the history of the NFL. His measurements in the combines were horrendous. They measured him on the 40-yard dash. He didn't perform well, but they didn't measure the right things. So that in and of itself is like, whoa, hold on a second. How in the world did all of these teams pass up on this guy who is a first ballot Hall of Famer, who's won 6 Super Bowls? How did they miss him? And then,
go ahead.
And then how did the guy go, hold on. We've already passed him over several times. Bill Belichick, the brain behind the organization, is like, okay, we need to take him now.
Yeah, well, but I think that goes to what we do to children everywhere. We ignore that they are complex, unique, irreplaceable human beings that cannot be measured by a statistical number, because, you know, Howard Gardner talks, there is multiple intelligences. There are so many ways that we are smart, and it's not just one way, but multiple ways. But the only thing we test is math smart and language smart. So it's this narrow, like 2 out of the 8 or 9 intelligence are the only thing we can measure, because they're only thing that are quantitative, and that's still not the appropriate statistic. So it is the craziest thing to ignore humanness in all of these things. It is absolutely insane. And I think we can show so many examples over and over where it doesn't work. It doesn't work. But to give grace, we didn't know, now we know.
Well, we would love to hear what you all might be thinking. If you think we're nuts for saying what we're saying, please share your comments. We love to hear them. We really appreciated all the comments that we've been receiving. So feel free to post a comment. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, all of the different places at queuedup.com. So we're going to end this episode talking about grace. Pam, I appreciate it because it's been an interesting week.
It has. It has.
So thank you all for joining us,
Yes,
and catch us on the other side of our next episode.